Hi guys, hope everyone's well and welcome back to the education section. In this video I'm going to touch on calf training and specifically how to basically get the most out of your calf training. So to start off, we need to touch on the anatomy of the calves, what the calves are pretty much made up of, what muscle groups are the calves comprised of. So your calves are comprised of three muscle groups primarily. There's some more smaller muscle groups, but for the purpose of this video and for the purpose of being able to train your calves effectively, you don't really need to know the smaller, more intricate details, if that makes sense. So the three muscles I'm going to touch on are the gastrocnemius, or what I'm going to abbreviate as the gastroc, the soleus, and the tibialis anterior. They're the three muscles that I recommend kind of splitting up when it comes to your calf training to train it as kind of effectively as possible. That's all you pretty much need to know. And in terms of the role of the calves, so the role of the calves is, well, it's got two roles. And the reason why it's got two roles is one of the muscle groups, the gastrocnemius, crosses over the knee. So basically, it goes up the back of your leg, of course, and it doesn't attach to the top of your lower leg. It attaches above the knee joint, which means it doesn't just influence what's happening at the ankle. It doesn't just extend the ankle. It also helps you flex the knee. So imagine you're doing a hamstring curl, for example. That's also going to be one of the role of the calves as a result of that. So yeah, the gastrocnemius originates at the femur, which is basically the upper leg, which is why it will help you during a hamstring curl, which is why it will help during knee flexion. And the soleus, which is the other main muscle at the back of your calf, originates around the top of the tibia and fibula. So basically the bones of the lower leg, to put it simple. And both insert into your Achilles tendon, which then joins onto the back of your foot, which is why your calves play a role in basically taking your foot from this position to that position. And due to the gastroc being biarticular, that's why it's got two roles. So therefore, two functions. And the soleus, due to only crossing one joint, the soleus, the other muscle, only kind of attaching to the top of the lower leg, doesn't attach across the knee. It's only got one function because it only crosses one joint, if that makes sense. So if it crosses one joint, it influences one joint. If it crosses two joints, it's going to influence two joints. So what does this mean in practice? Pretty much we want to do movements where we're taking our foot through as much dorsiflexion and plantar flexion as possible. So dorsiflexion is basically when you're bringing your foot up. Plantar flexion is when you're planting your foot. You could look at it, bringing it down. And you don't really need to know that. I don't know why there's kind of a different name for it for your kind of your ankle joint, because usually you just call it flexion and extension, so it just kind of complicates things slightly. But for the purpose of kind of inform you for the video, that's what they're called. But you don't really need to know that, and it's not going to affect your ability to kind of train your ankles effectively or train your calves effectively. And basically, what this basically tells us in practice, in my opinion, is we should perform straight leg variations. They're going to be the most time efficient because it's going to work both muscles a bit more. And time efficiency is obviously a consideration with your training, especially a small body part with calves. People don't train them as much as they train maybe their quads or other body parts. And it also tells us our knee should remain still when we're training the calves, because when we move the knee, that's not only going to influence you using your quad, because your quad is what basically straightens the knee, but it's also going to influence the length of the gastrocnemius, the gastroc, if that makes sense. So the reason we don't want to kind of move two joints at once, like change the length of them, is we're maybe even moving the same amount in terms of the same range of motion, but we're not getting as great a stretch through that muscle. Because if, let's say when you kind of lower during a calf raise, let's say you bend your knee during that period, then you're actually not changing the length of your calf as much as if your knee's set in stone still. So that's why you want it nice and still. So we're not using other muscle groups, and so we're not also not getting as great a stretch during or through our gastroc or through one of the parts of a calf. So the knee should remain still. And it also tells us like bent leg variations will bias more of the soleus as it's got more leverage. Due to basically the gastroc, the other muscle in the calf, it's more squeezed, it's more shortened in length. So muscles can be stretched or shortened. For example, bicep stretched here, shortened here. So if, let's say, with our gastroc, if it's shortened, it's not going to be able to kind of lift as much weight, produce as much force, because we're weaker when we're in that squeezed position, if that makes sense. So it means when we're doing bent leg variations, we'll use our soleus more, which is a different part of our calf. And to cover all bases, if you want to maximise calf development, it's not a bad idea doing both, so you're not putting all your eggs in one basket. So you can kind of maximise development of both kind of parts of your calf. And it also tells us that our gastrocnemius, or one of the parts of our calf, will also help when we're doing hamstring curl variations. So if you've ever felt kind of a burning sensation in your calf, or you felt your calf kind of be worked during a lying hamstring curl or a seated hamstring curl, I more so find that during a lying hamstring curl, that's most likely why, because your calf will play a role in your ability to do hamstring curls. So, next up, exercise selection. Pretty simple when it comes to calf training. We want to do straight leg variations, we want to do bent knee variations and hamstring curls. I wouldn't really think if, for example, see if I wanted to build my calves and prioritise my calves, the first exercise I wouldn't pick is hamstring curls. So we will work them during hamstring curls, but it's not an exercise I'd really select to train my calves. They're just going to be trained slightly as a byproduct of it, if that makes sense, and getting stronger at hamstring curls. But basically, some straight knee variations could be like a calf press on the leg press. It could be like a standing calf raise machine, a Smith machine calf raise, a single leg calf raise. If you've, let's say, not got as much equipment, or you want to do it at home, then you can kind of use your body weight and just like a dumbbell or a kettlebell in the other hand and just really control it so you're not having to lift as much weight. But in terms of the difference between each of the variations I kind of listed, it's kind of personal preference to an extent. A potential benefit of doing like a calf press on like a leg press is you're not loading your lower back as much as if you're doing a standing calf raise, which is something to maybe consider. And in terms of bent knee variations, there's not a ton. There's kind of like a seated calf raise machine, and there's a Smith machine seated calf raise as well. So basically, if you kind of use one of the pads that people use during hip thrusts or during like squats, if you put that on your thigh and you put the bar on it, then you have a step up box below you where you have the balls of your feet on. You can kind of recreate a seated calf raise if you really want to do it. However, you will get kind of the most time efficiency and bang for your buck from a straight leg calf raise. So it's not the end of the world if you can't do it. And also like hamstring curls, like I said, so any kind of hamstring curl variation pretty much where you're bending your knee through kind of resistance going the opposite direction. Of course, any movement you need resistance for it to be effective. You just be getting stronger at it over time. And in terms of executing calf training and getting the most out of your calf training, pretty much just like any other muscle group, calves are very similar. Taking your calf through a full range of motion, so getting a good stretch at the bottom, driving right up and making sure you're fully contracting your calf, placing the weight through the balls of your feet and not your toes. That's something I see people make a common mistake. You don't want to have your feet too far up or too far down when you're performing it, and you want your legs around parallel for the most part. Maybe you can potentially argue if you have your feet pointed in and out, it will potentially change what part of your calf you work, but unless you are an absolute massive bodybuilder and you've built the majority of your muscle mass, you don't need to kind of worry about those kind of very, very small, minute details. Just focus on getting a chunk of muscle in your calves and on your body as a whole. And you want to keep your knees still during straight leg variations, like I said, and spending time pausing in both ranges and not using momentum. Especially with calves, like the tendon at the back of our leg is like the biggest kind of tendon, one of the biggest and strongest tendons we've got in our body. So you can kind of use that just to bounce out that bottom position, so it's good to spend time there. And it's also good to see when you're doing a calf raise, when you're loading, don't just go limp. What I mean by that is, when we're doing a calf raise, you want to control getting into that stretch position. You don't want to just kind of flop and then let your feet hang at the bottom. You want to still have tension going through your calf there in that stretch position to get the most out of it. And a slight bend in your leg during straight leg variations can encourage your soleus to have a bit more leverage, to have a bit more ability to work as well. And there's no secrets when it comes to your calf training. It's just kind of effort appropriate volume and time. So there's not really anything like magic or revolutionary. It's just people have weak calves because they don't give them the same attention as any other body part. Think about how much maybe work you do for your biceps and your triceps. I guarantee that's a lot less than the work you do for your calves. Same with like any other kind of body part really. Your side delts, you're probably doing more work for them than your calves. So standing calf raise example, just notice his foot width is very kind of consistent throughout in terms of it's round about shoulder width or round about in line with his knee joint, his hip joint, and the angle of the knee pretty much remains unchanged throughout. You can see he's not kind of getting a lot more bend at the knee at the bottom or doing anything crazy at the top as well. Like the angle of your knee should remain pretty static throughout the exercise. And as for structuring sessions, calves aren't overly fatiguing. It's not the same as like doing a squat or a leg press, so you can hit them at the start when you're fresh, and it doesn't take away from the rest of the session. The only caveat to that is it can potentially impact your ability to stabilise other movements, like a barbell back squat if you're doing your calves first. And if you aren't training them frequently, then the maybe importance and value of training them when you're fresh becomes even larger, so that's something to consider. So if you aren't training them an awful lot, then you might not want to leave them till the end of the session, if that makes sense. So you're kind of not setting yourself up for success, unless you just don't really care about your calf development, then that's obviously completely fine. But some people kind of feel they skip them if they leave them till last, so something to consider is you can put them first and it will prevent you maybe skipping them if you're one to do so. And it'll mean you'll put more physical and you'll have more physical and mental energy at the start, and you'll put more into your sets ultimately. So if not, I like to put them at the end because I don't like disrupting the flow of my session. I don't want to do a barbell back squat, then a calf raise, and then a leg press after that. I want it to kind of flow nicely, putting it at the start or the end. And although they're worked during a hamstring curl, like I wouldn't kind of let it influence the place in the session. I generally like my hamstring curl closer to the start before the compound movements. But saying that, I'm not thinking I'll get some more calf volume, so I'll put it at the start. It just goes at the start or close to the start, and I'll work maybe my calves very slightly as a byproduct of that. And due to like the lower fatigue aspect of them, you can tag them on at other aspects or at other points of your training week. What I mean by that is you can train them at the start of maybe a push session or at the end of a push session, and that just allows you to accumulate a bit more volume for that body part because it's not super fatiguing. The only kind of caveat to like maybe not want to do them first is, like I said, it might impact your ability to stabilise things like a barbell back squat, so that is something to consider. But yeah, you can tag them on the end of other sessions, which can be a great idea if your calves are a weak body part and something to maybe consider. Thanks very much for watching. The full video is available for my online coaching clients in the Coach by Charlie education section. If you're interested in online coaching, then feel free to apply via the link in the description. If you did enjoy the video, please like, subscribe and ring the notification bell for my future videos. Thank you very much for watching.